Hello and good day everyone. My name is Angel Grace Guevarra. I am your first presenter for today's discussion with the other presenters as well, Jenn Pandunga, Julius Ceasar Diamante, Nhor Barlie, and May Beriso respectively. And we are the Group 1. Our today's discussion is about the socio-economic, political, and cultural issues and taxation during the colonial period. We will discuss the writings of Marcelo H. del Pilar entitled The Monastic Supremacy in the Philippines. It analyzes the socio-economic, political, and cultural aspects of friarchy in the Philippines during the late 19th century. So we will discuss about the issues present during the Spanish period and the supremacy of the friars during those times and how it significantly affects the Filipinos. Second, how the Spanish representatives governed the Filipino people. It discusses important issues like taxes levied by the Spanish government to the Filipinos, revolts against excessive taxes, and tax reform in 1884. Objectives. At the end of this discussion, students are expected to A. Develop a thorough understanding of the socio-economic, political, and cultural issues in the Philippines during the colonial period. I hope that at the end of this discussion, you guys can obtain information and acquire understanding of the issues present in socio-economic, political, and cultural aspects and comprehend the events during the colonial period. B. Trace and grasp the evolution of the taxation during the colonial period in the country. So, at the end of the discussion, you guys can trace the evolution of taxation throughout those times and how it influenced our taxation that we have today. C. Propose a recommendation or solution to present day problems based on their understanding of its root cause. Lastly, I hope that after this discussion, you guys will be able to reflect as you all understand the root cause of one of our present day problems and create a recommendation or solutions for it. La Soberania Monacal in Filipinas or Monastic Supremacy in the Philippines was a book by Del Pilar that criticized the friars for their mistaken doctrines that had led to the poverty and misery of the Filipino people. So Marcelo H. del Pilar created a book called Monastic Supremacy in the Philippines to attack the friars because of their misguided or wrong teachings, which causes the Filipino struggles, poverty, and suffering during those times. He published under the pen name of Plaridel to protect his identity from the Spaniards. Jose Rizal as well has a pen name which is the Laong Laan, because those times, if you rebel against them, the Spaniards, you will be executed. Early in the colonial era, the structure, personal, and social function of the church were all established. They became heavily involved in the exploitation of Filipinos, which had a variety of transforming impacts on the lives of Filipinos in political, religious, and economic problems brought about by the Spanish friars' monastic supremacy. So, the religious before really played a predominant role in the administration of the Philippines. They have the authority and the power to do the things they want, and this has definitely transformed the lives of the Filipino people in socio-economic, political, and cultural aspects. And I just want to remind you guys as well that the socio-economic, political, and cultural issues present during the Spanish period was analyzed on Marcelo H. del Pilar's Monastic Supremacy in the Philippines. That means that we are basically going to discuss some of the issues being stated in the writings of Marcelo H. del Pilar in the Monastic Supremacy in the Philippines, and some were taken from the other additional sources. So let's start with the socio-economic issues. First is the classes were divided into four: Maginoo or noble class, Maharlika or warrior, Timawa freeman or commoner, and Alipin or servant. This has become an issue because social classes, of course, as we all know, causes discrimination, and it reflects unequal access to rights, resources, and power in society, especially during the Spanish period where the rich people are extremely dominant. There is no equality, and when you're in the top of the pyramid, you can do anything you want. Minor offices were only held by Filipinos. Their freedoms and choices had been almost completely neglected, and they were not provided with the advantages of public education. Like what I said, there is no equality during those times. Their freedom and choices are neglected, and they weren't given the privilege for public education because during the Spanish period, most schools are private and only the rich people can have an access to it. The education during those times is not for everyone and isn't open for everyone. The jurisdiction of monastic communities thus came to include the best lands and estates. They called this friars to encomenderos or friar acquisition of land, where they were granted the right to compel the natives to work their land and pay tribute. Thousands of hectares, actually, of the best land in the Philippine archipelago were owned or held by these religious orders during those times, and this has, of course, a significant effect economically because these holdings was detrimental to the part of the natives who pays prohibitive rents which were demanded for them. While the monastic orders construct grand and lavish convents in Manila and establish a spacious palace for the regular curate's house in each parish, the Philippine government lacks the resources necessary to carry out public works. This is actually very intriguing because the difference between the government and the monastic orders is very evident during these times. They can create lavish and pricey convents, but the government can even carry out the public works because of having not enough resources to use. This just shows how powerful the friars are before because they have the necessary resources and the money for it. Primary schools are established by the government in each town. The light materials used to construct the government buildings hardly come close to resembling the friar curator's table. The friars' convents and houses uses sturdy and solid materials, while the government buildings uses light materials. And that is a big difference, to be honest. This is definitely an issue because this just shows how, like what I said, how the friars are more powerful than the government. They can actually acquire everything they wanted. While the government encounters numerous challenges in trying to collect taxes from the tax-paying public, religious institutions are able to empty the same population's purses with ease in exchange for heavenly promises. Fires during these times is just powerful, and it's because people are afraid of them. The government couldn't even easily collect taxes from people, but with the religious institutions, they're able to empty the pockets easily in exchange with heavenly promises. These heavenly promises are like, for example, when the priest would say, I would pray for your husband's soul or wife's soul, I would pray that you will be cured, and etc. In exchange, of course, for money. At this point, this isn't serving God anymore. This just shows how greedy the friars are in their wealth and their power. While the government is concerned about fulfilling urgent financial needs, monastic treasuries are brimming with funds, so their main concern is how to send their opulent savings, which support the banking interests of foreign trade out of the country. So, monastic communities have taken out money from the people to use it for their personal whims. The government and the people is in the brink of poverty while the monastic treasuries are brimming with funds. Lastly, the government refrains from developing new sources of revenue to protect Filipino interests, but the friars constantly develop new forms of devotion, some of which are very expensive, and the public pays for them out of fear of upsetting the friars, whose influence they are aware has resulted in the exile of numerous innocent people. Like what they said, friars are powerful during the early colonial era and they can do anything they want without even getting punished. Because of this, there is a notable contrast between the poverty of the government and the opulence of the vow of poverty. And also you might ask, what is their source of income? One of the principal sources of income of the monastic order is the trade in religious objects. Like a belt, for example, without priestly blessing, it costs actually in a low price. But the moment the priest blesses it and the belt passes onto the class of spiritual things, it is sold at a very high price. And it just shows that monastic orders are superior in these times. They can do what they want because the government is under or below them and the people is afraid of them. That's it for socioeconomic issues. And the next presenter is Jenn Pandunga, who's going to tackle about the political and cultural issues.
Thank you, Miss Angel. Now, we're going to discuss the political and cultural aspect in monastic supremacy in the Philippines. In continuation to the discussion of Miss Guevarra, the political aspect during the supremacy in the Philippines is not good because of the misguided teaching and leadership in the government for their own interest. Monastic supremacy means the service to God and King. The church organization, personnel, and role in society were all defined early in the colonial era. The friars maintained complete control of secondary and higher instruction. As we hasten, during the monastic supremacy in the political aspect, the friars interfered in the Philippines government for a long time. They controlled and ruled the country through their laws imposed that contradict to the country and to its institution. They do this not for the people, but for their own interest. They frighten the government with the rebelliousness of the country, and they frighten the country with the disposition of the government. The friars forced our Filipino to work in building their houses and churches, which they called conventos. Through the leadership of the military civil, who led the people in making infrastructure such as highways, bridges, and more. The labor thus owed to the government was frequently hired out to individuals, and public works in many provinces were neglected, while officials' pockets are lined. Which means, ang government during this time is sila ang namamahala sa paggawa or in making projects and hiring individuals in any public works. However, in this matter, some provinces ay hindi nabigyang pansin sapagkat ang mga opisyales ang nakikinabang sa pera. Almost all parishes are run by the friars, and as such, their parochial mission serves as both a political body or institution and a patronage system for the people. So, during this time, the friars are those people who had the authority not just in the religious activities, but also had the authority administration of the colony. He supervised all the activities involved in the community or country. And they also conducted many of the executive and control functions of the government on the local level. The convents always opposed peace and unity in the society. During this time, the friar system is to instill fear in the government and in the country so they can reign to the expense of everybody. The friars is prevented the public and government from understanding one another at any cost, keeping them in conflict. The convents are the millionaires of the country. Their large funds cannot be alienated or separated. The people were burdened by the religious festival tax. The people suffer as a result of lavish celebration on each saint's day. So during this time, people suffer because they are forced to pay as a high amount to the church, especially when there is a celebration like this. There is no exemption even if you are poor. This situation lead the people to suffer in exchange to the luxurious celebration. which this until now this become a tradition to every Filipino, especially to the Catholic people. Moreover, it was one of the various institutions through which the burden of taxation in the Philippines was put upon the poor, while Spaniards, mestizos, and those few pure-blood natives were even exempted from the service. It was also claimed that the friars introduced village life, but the truth is, under their guidance, the community centered more and more about the churches or stone edifices which were built under their supervision. It also alleged that the friars assumed to be the supreme representative of the authority and belittled the dignity of lay officials. Interview for the removal of such officials, both small and great, who will not submit to dictations. Priority created many privileges, and this is not for the country and its government, but for the prior selfish visions. They are able to control the status quo of the country, and the privilege to vote is in the hands of the curate. Next is the culture aspect during the monastic supremacy. So the parish priest during this time is a resource that the municipal officials rely on to carry out their tasks. So this means that the municipal officials should always rely on the parish priest resources. Next is the curate's signature is a necessary prerequisite to everything and for everything. So as what I have mentioned earlier, that the friars or the curate has the role such as keeper of the list of the residents of the town, and their signature had to be seen in all financial papers of the town. There is no law that specifies the requirements the curate must meet in order or either approve or decline in any consent or permission. So under the law, there is no specified order that the curate should require something before he approve or decline that consent or permission. So everything is under or controlled. The decision is controlled by the curate. So if it pleases the curate, supreme order shall be carried out. Next is the prior accusation of the land. So or the priors to encomendero. So what means of accusation? So first is the royal bequest. So this is the requested by the friars to the king to give them some states in the local villages or in the native villages so that the missionaries could support themselves. Next is the buying of the land. So this part, the friars bought land from the natives using the money obtained from the church's fees, trade and profits gained from the sale of the land or of in a very low prices. Next is the foreclosure mortgage. So this part, the natives lack capital for extensive cultivation. So the partnership were formed between the farmers and the friars, wherein the friars provided capital while the farmers work on the field. Friars began to demand that their advance be regarded as loans payable at a fixed rate of interest. Farmers' debt ran into debt leading to foreclosure of lands. Next is the land grabbing. So the land grabbing, an additional hectares of a land outside the original boundaries of prior property were gobbled up each time a new survey is conducted. Priests claimed lands and had them titled. Original native sitters were now declared squatters. By converting the Filipino to Christianity, Spanish Catholic missionaries reshaped Filipino society and culture to conform to Hispanic norms. So, Hispanic origin includes people from Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Central and South American, Dominican, and other or unknown Latin American or Spanish origin. People of Hispanic origin came be of any race. The Filipinos would be Hispanized, having the Spanish language, culture, customs, and trades taught to them. People of Hispanic origin may be of any race. The Filipinos would be Hispanized, having the Spanish language, culture, customs, and trades taught to them. Furthermore, The purpose of Del Pilar's work, the Soberania Monacal en Filipinas, or the monastic supremacy in the Philippines, attacked the friars for their misguided teaching, which had resulted in Filipinos' poverty and suffering. That until now, the root of poverty in the country is still present in today's world. The next presenter is Mr. Diamante, who's going to tackle about the taxation during the Spanish period.
So, I will be discussing the taxation during the Spanish period from 1581 to 1898. So, the revenues were enjoyed by the Spanish government for more than 3 centuries of their occupation of the Philippine Islands. So, taxation during the Spanish period was compulsory, or it is obliged or required by the law. There were two purposes or reasons why they required to pay taxes during the Spanish period. First is as a recognition of Spain's sovereignty over the colonies. And second, to defray the expenses of pacification, which is the act of forcibly suppressing hostility within the colonies, and to govern them. Next is, there are 3 chapters how the Spanish representatives governed the Philippine people. So, first is the taxes imposed by the Spanish government in the Philippines. So, which includes tributo, sanctorum, donativo, coja de comunidad, and servicio personal. So, first is the tributo. Tributo was a general tax paid by the Filipinos to Spain, which amounted to 8 reals. In peso, it is equivalent to 1 peso. Those who were required to pay tribute were, first, they must be 18 to 50 years old and be males. They should be carpenters, bricklayers, blacksmith, tailors, or shoemakers. And town workers, such as those in road construction, and those who is a public in nature. Next is the sanctorum. This was a tax in the amount of 3 reals. These were required for the cost of Christianization, which include the construction of churches and the purchase of materials for religious celebration. Next, the donativo. This was a tax in the amount of a half real for the military campaign of the government against the Muslims, which in later years, however, the amount collected from donativo was almost exclusively used for Spanish fort in Zamboanga. And next is the caja de comunidad. Was a tax collected in the amount of 1 real for the incurred expenses of the town in the construction of roads, repair of bridges, or the improvement of public buildings. So, last is the servicio personal, which is also called the polo y servicio. Was a form of forced labor during the Spanish period in the Philippines. All able-bodied males from 16 to 60 years old were required to work in the construction of bridges, churches, and galleon ships. They were called polista. Earlier, the polistas were required to work for 40 days. However, the number of days was lowered to 15 days in 1884, which I have discussed, which is called the tax reform of 1884. As a result of the tax reform issued through a royal decree, some of the polistas were brought to fight against the Muslims, and others were brought in the Spanish expeditions. So, the only way that a polista can be freed from forced labor was when he paid a fala or fine, which is equivalent to 1.5 reals. But only very few could afford to pay the fine. So, the Governor Silio, Cabeza de Barangay, and other members of the Principalia, or the rich people or higher class people in the community, were exempted from forced labor and fala. So, that is the taxation during the Spanish period. So,
the revolts against the tribute. By the way, my name is Barlie, and I will be going to discuss this lesson, which also covers the four revolution during the implementation of taxes on Spanish period and the tax reform of 1884. So during the Spanish period and their implementation of taxes, there were four revolutions. So the Cagayan and Dingras revolts of 1589, the Augustan Summarized Revolt of 1649 to 1650, the Francisco Maniago's Revolt of 1660 to 1661, and last one is the Andres Malong Revolt of 1660 to 1661. So, since the Philippines is composed of thousands and hundreds of islands, the Spanish government have made the repartimientos. So, it was the royal grant by the kings by a subject of a certain amount of land in native population. So, the subject would be given the right to collect tributo, which is also known as the tribute from this, and enjoy certain restrictions and benefits of their industry. So first is we will be going to discuss the Cagayan and Dingras revolts of 1589. So these revolts have occurred on Luzon in present day, which is also known as the province of Cagayan and Ilocos Norte. The native rose in revolt over alleged abuse of tax collectors and collection of high taxes that are led by the Ilocanos, Ibanags, and other Filipino who were abused taxpayers. These were the first native revolt against the hated tribute and the corrupt tribute collectors. And the Philippine tax system was also reformed because of this tax revolt. Because of the unjust tax and alleged abuses of tax collectors, the revolts against the tribute, which is also known as the Dingras Revolt or Ilocos Norte Revolts, uprise. The people have fed up and they have been killed over 6 and would be the tax collectors who have arrived from Bigan. So in order for the rebellions to stop, the government have given the rebellions a pardon. So because of this revolution, the tax system was reformed. Next is we have the Augustan Summarized Revolt of 1649 to 1650. It all started on June 1, 1649 in Palapag, which is also known today as the Northern Samar. He is a Waray native and led his fellow workers who were under forced labor to revolts against the Spaniards. The revolution had spread to Cebu, to Masbate, Camiguin, to Bicol, Camarines, and the islands of Mindanao, which are Zamboanga and Surigao. So, Augustin Samurai was captured and executed on June 1650 that have led to eventual defeat of the revolts. So, Augustin Samurai, he is a native Waray from Palapag, which is also known as the Northern Samar. With his followers, he rose up with arms and fight against the Spaniards, and which have forced labor system in Samar. And because of the revolt, the rebels were responsible for the death of one of the first priest of Palapag, and the revolution, which is also spread to the same provinces, which are Cebu, Masbate, Bicol, and also in the islands of Mindanao. However, Augustin Samurai was captured on June 1650 and led the defeat of the rebels. But one of his co-inspirer, which is also known as David Dula, did not stop on fighting. But later on, he was wounded in one of their fierce battle with the Spaniards, and later on, he was captured by the Spanish government, and later he was executed, including the 7 key lieutenants. Next is we have the Francisco Maniago's revolt that took in 1660 until 1661. So, these led the revolts initially caused by Kapampangan's protests against the tribute, forced labor, and rice exploitation. Later, it became the struggle to free the natives from Spanish rule. They were made to work for 8 months under unfair conditions and were not paid for labor. They set their campsite on fire and fight ensued, and this was the start of the bloody revolt in Pangasinan. So another revolutions that happens during the Spanish period was the revolt that is headed by Francisco Maniago. So Francisco Maniago, he is a Kapampangan which rise up in Pampanga. So the Kapampangans or the people of Pampanga is also known as against the tribute system and forced labor, and most especially they are against rice exploitation. And because of that treatment, the unfair and unjust treatment that they received from the Spaniards, which they were not paid for 8 months of work, and the rice that are being purchased from them by the Spaniards are not paid, they come up into the idea of doing the revolution. So, on that, they fight against the Spaniards, they set their campsite on fires, and this revolution was also the starting of the bloody revolution during that time. So next is the revolution of Andres Malong in 1660 to 1661. So Malong, who Maniago persuaded rebel against the Spaniards' mistreatment since they were suffering from the same abuses. So Malong hoped to be the king of province of Pangasinan as he responded to Maniago's call and rallied the people of Pangasinan to fight the Spaniards. So these revolts is headed by Andres Malong, who was also known as the Maestro de Campo. So the Maestro de Campo, it is the inferior Capitan General that act as a chief of staff. So Malong was coaxed by Maniago because of the same treatment that they received from the Spaniards. Malong also assists the Spaniards on governing the different towns of the same province because of his dream or because he was hoping to be the king. But later, he abandoned that since the war between the Spaniards and the Filipino broke out. So as he headed the call of Maniago, which led the revolts against the Spaniards, and when he succeeded the revolts or the revolution, as what he was dreaming or as what he was hoping, he proclaimed himself as a king. So next is we will be going to discuss the tax reform of 1884. So tax reform of 1884 was one of the good reforms that was introduced to the Spaniards to us in 19th century, which is known as the tax reform of 1884. So the tax reform are contained of two important provisions. These are the abolition of tribute and replacement of cedula, which is also known as a certificate of identification, and the reduction of 40-day forced labor to 15 days. So cedula personales were first issued based on the royal decree of March 6, 1884, and that all men and women who were resident of the island, Spaniards, foreigners, and natives include age over 18 years old, were required to obtain a cedula. The only exception here during this period was the Chinese, who were required to pay another full tax or remontandos infieles. So on 1884, the payment of the tribute was refilled and replaced by the poll tax. So this type of tax collected by the means of identification or the certificate of identification, which is also called as the graduate poll tax, by which all of the residents were required to obtain cedula, including the natives and even foreigners, and to carry with them all the times. So cedula was very significant during that period as it is the means of any form of transactions, including on making any contract, be it on public and private, in presenting your claims, on doing businesses, on courts, on matriculation in any learning institutions, on money deposits and withdrawing deposits, on running for office, voting and undertaking, and most especially in traveling and entering any domestic services. So basically, cedula that time was very significant as it is a form of checking of the Spaniards to the Filipino identity, and at the same time you cannot do anything or you cannot do your transactions without your cedula. So the cedula was also created by the Spaniards to the Filipinos or to the residents for the tax payment. So the cedula are the people are obligated or expected to have their cedula when they are above the age of 18, regardless of any nationality they have. So that is the end of my topic. Thank you.
My part in this report is all about the taxation during the American period of time. So during those times, the Americans followed the Spanish system of taxation, wherein the land tax, which levies fees on both urban and rural real estate, superseded the urbana, or the tax based on annual rental value of an urban real estate. On this period of time, the civil government of the Philippines was under the presidency of the Republican president named William H. Taft. He was also the one who advocated for permanent national income tax. However, it was only during the term of the second civil governor named Luke E. Wright that the Bureau of Internal Revenue was created through the passage of the Reorganization Act No. 1189. This Republic Act is an act authorizing the President of the Republic of the Philippines to enter into trade agreements with other countries for a limited period and for other purposes. In addition, the BIR was formally organized and made operational on August 1, 1904. Next is the Internal Revenue Law of 1904. This law includes license and excise taxes, taxes on banks, document stamp taxes, cedula, taxes on insurance companies, forest products, mining concessions, taxes on business, and occupational licenses. During 1907, there were changes in cedula and industrial tax. The cedula underwent adjustments, and it was permitted in some locations to double the cedula charge. The next significant event was on 1913. It was when the Underwood-Simons Tariff Act was passed or enacted under the presidency of Woodrow Wilson. This is when Governor General Francis Barton Harrison decided that the tax receipts must be increased to make up for the loss. The goal of this act includes the elimination of customs on the majority of the raw materials and the reduction of taxes in the manufactured and semi-manufactured goods. This resulted in the reduction of the revenue of the government since the taxes levied on sugar, tobacco, hemp, and copra were lifted. And because of that, three new sources of tax were introduced. First is the income tax of 1914. Second is the inheritance or the estate tax of 1919. And third is the national lottery of 1932. Income tax is a tax from a person's income, emoluments, profits arising from property, practice of profession, conduct of trade or business, or on the pertinent items of gross income specified in the Tax Code of 1997. Inheritance or estate tax is a tax on the right of the deceased person to transmit his or her estate to any of his or her lawful beneficiaries at the time of death or on any certain transfers. Last is the national lottery. The amendment makes it so that winnings over 10,000 pesos will be taxed only 10% and winnings under 10,000 pesos will not be taxed. This is Cherime Beriso, and this ends the part of my report which is all about the taxation during the American period of time.